Good evening, folks. Just Brady here tonight without Chance, and so we're not going to be talking about Shakespeare, but we will be talking about some closely related subjects such as history, language, and etymology, and why I think that there's some irony between Christianity and the words pagan and heathen. All right, folks, good to see you and good to have you here at this sort of a little stranger, different episode, maybe related to that Super Mario episode I did, in case any of y'all never watched that. But I like this channel as a sort of not just a full-on Shakespeare deep dive channel, because it assuredly is, but it also, I think we can apply this Apocalypsis Historia philosophy, this sort of nullius in verba philosophy to a lot of different things. And I also, maybe this is almost a sort of vlog video of sorts, as I sort of just carry you through my, the musings that I've had on some of this stuff, and you can tell me what you like about this or not in the comments, or what you agree upon or not. Maybe I can relate it to a little bit of Shakespeare as well, and I think that the power of language is always going to be a concept in the Shakespeare question that we're always going to be sort of hitting on, and that's why Shakespeare is so potent, is because how much of the words did he craft, or how many adages and aphorisms or sort of or memes come from his works. And so I think that it's always going to be important to just keep I like to cast a wider net over this whole thing. Chance is definitely the deep diver into the plays of John Lilly and Marston, and how all these people connect in that sort of sense. And so he's very focused on that sort of time period where I cast like a wide net, and I go up and down and left and right. I'm sort of all over the place. But this is one little particular subject that I sort of stumbled upon last year that I thought was highly interesting. And it does relate to Shakespeare, because the word heath hits home for me, because it's one of the first opening parts of Macbeth, which I've repeated ad nauseum on this channel about one of the big influences for me. And just sort of coming back to that term a lot, the word heath. And so you can tell how much it resonates with me. But I saw some other interesting sort of aspects about this word that I think has some, like I said in the intro, some ironic full circle sort of coming about here. And I'm not trying to make too much judgment about the circumstance per se, because I think I'll kind of expand upon that a little later. But let me just carry you through the etymology of some of these words here tonight. I'll be able to kind of string together my argument essentially about why I think this irony is here. And definitely let me know in the comments and down below if you agree or not, if you see what I'm seeing, or whether I'm abusing methodologies, and you can let me know. So, for instance, when I think of the word pagan, as someone born in the early 90s, this term, along with the word heathen, sort of conjures an image of a sort of what I've been calling a spiritual delinquent, someone who has a very perverse sense of devotion, essentially. And the image of a hedonistic pan or devil reveler comes to mind. The same thing, if not worse, for the word heathen, from pagan. Heathen definitely has like a little more of a bite maybe to it. Heathen dog. I'm pretty sure Shakespeare, I wish Chance was here, because I'm pretty sure he would maybe be able to tell me some of these things. But I think some of these other words he definitely did use that we can reference later on here, and hopefully you'll see what I mean here. Both of these words have different origins in a sense, and one thing they do have in common, though, is that they will become eventually to be used as sort of Christian designations for essentially like others outside of their sphere of influence, or outside of like their adherence to that culture, to that religion, right? And essentially, but it's like the others aspect that I'm really focusing on, and it almost has a sort of as we'll come to find, a sort of an actual physical feel to it with these words and how they sort of separate. We are these people, we are a Christian people, and in this sense, and those are the other people. Those are the pagans. Those are the heathens, right? But what I found so interesting is essentially the etymology of these words, and how they like I said, they have maybe a modern feel to it, a certain conjuring, but as I became to understand these words, there is actually a lot to it, okay? So we'll pull up some etymologies here. Okay, so now this is just the etymology.com definition of it, but pagan actually comes from the late paganus, plural, or pagan, which literally from classical Latin meant rustic, civilian, non-combatant, and also meant someone of a country or village, or the people of a rural district originally. Okay, so it's a non-derogatory word, essentially. Yeah, so for literally countryside, it was not a derogatory word from the outset. It was just Paganus was a person living in the countryside, a rural district, and tied to the land, away from political and religious centers. And I'll have an image here that I'll flash above my head, but in case you didn't know, the word left, sinistra, like left hand, which is where we get the word sinister from, and then the word dexter, or dexterity or dexterous, is right-handed. I'm showing my is right-handed. Okay. And these come from Latin terms, essentially, also designated in Roman city planning, essentially. Okay, so pars sinistra is those outside the left, past the left, to the left side, outside of the city walls, into the wild lands, into the land of the unknown, the uncivilized world, essentially. And pars destra is inside the city walls, where there are the temples. That is the sacred. And it is, it is a place of order and not so much of as a place of chaos, maybe in a sense. So once again, yeah, you can even see some of this, if you're familiar with Western esoteric magic, yeah, left-hand magic and right-hand magic even kind of comes from this Roman city planning, and even some of these connections in etymology even originates here as well. So yeah, sinistra, left hand, literally has, and if you're a left-handed person and you know the history of left-handed people, sometimes were discriminated against, and they probably would also know about. I think Chance would have a word here or two if he was here to say about left-handed people and their plight. But here we go. Yeah, so on the left side, from sinister, opposite of dexter, and if we check out dexter, it definitely is someone who means readiness and skillful. Prosperity. So definitely comes to have a certain positive connotation in juxtaposition to the sinister one, right? So interesting little start off here as we start looking through this. So yeah, pagan at first just essentially meant a person who lives in the rural district. But essentially over time, it would become to mean, as a derogatory term, in English specifically even, to mean essentially like a simpleton, someone who's sort of a backwards thinker. But it inherently also becomes tied up with the earlier mentions of being outside in that rural district. And so now you're also out in the boonies, and you're just one of those folk that, you just cling to the old ways and your old customs. But over time, those people stay in that sort of sense, and when the Christians are now in sort of the centralized power, they're using these terms to designate the others and the people that are, not hip to the city religions, that were all the, activity of all the different sources of people coming into power and people coming into the city, and different thinkers and different cultures meshing and melding together and whatnot. And yeah, usually people outside of those areas are going to be slower to adopt to that. All right, so now the word heathen only appears after Christianity, and by Christians for those of the Germanic peoples specifically, okay? So pagan starts as a non-derogatory term, and over time it becomes slowly corrupted, to mean not just, people out in the country district, but people that are, out in the country district and they're not conforming, they're sticking to their old ways, and then slowly, they're like even backwards, and they're so, uncultured and unevolved, essentially degenerates or whatever. And so for heathen, it's essentially a synonymous word, but specifically tied to the Germanic peoples. And heathen potentially probably just means someone who lives on the heath, literally just dweller of the heath. I know that there was actually another bishop. I'll try to flash it here, that his name maybe in a picture. And yeah, he just said, if heathens are those who worship heathen gods, and heathen gods are going to be Odin, essentially, if you're Scandinavian, or if you're German, it'd be Wotan, Woden to the Old English people. Thor, and essentially all those gods are essentially the heathen gods, if you want to use it in that sense. Maybe the Slavs and the Frisians and all those kind of people, Finns and the Winds and all those kind of guys have different gods in their pantheons as they're sort of getting converted, but different story for a different day. But yeah, heathen people who live on the heath, and the heath is nothing more than a low-lying flowering shrub, and it becomes even like a sort of almost like its own biome essentially, and it's distinctly tied to the to these locales essentially, right? And even supposedly the word Gothic heathen is cognated from Hellenes, which is Greek for someone who is essentially was a Greek word for a non-Jewish person, someone who practiced the old Greek religions or the old Greek ways and spoke Greek. But this gets also cognated to Latin gentiles, which is also another word for a non-Jewish person as well. Inherently tied up with those outside of an Abrahamic faith even. And we start to see, and so yeah, what I'm getting at is that so the word heathen, I was sort of positing at the beginning of the video here, is maybe someone who is like a moral degenerate, a religious degenerate or something like that. Someone who is not even just unreligious, but someone who's like dangerously sort of like into black magic or something like that, or satanic or Satanism or something. It'd be closer to what I would say it is. But yeah, heathen, if you just break it down etymologically, heathen just literally means someone who lives on the heath. And so it's just describing a people living in a certain area, and once again, even cognates to people that are just of a different ways, essentially, right? Uses essentially as slurs for people that are outside the city of the influential powers of the city centers that where Christianity essentially takes its hold from. And maybe other monotheistic religions, or and maybe other religions like that. Zoroastrianism comes to mind as essentially one that comes out of probably a burgeoning city, and not rural folk who are sort of praying to gods of relevant things, fertility, harvest, things of that nature. And so now this other concept that I'm going to be hitting on is that you start to see a trend. And that things that end up being words that are related to city ends up being good. Think dexter, as we mentioned earlier, right-handed, good. City, good. And if you're sinister, if you're outside the city walls, if you're outside the part of influence, if you're out, in those rural districts, they're going to find more words that if you're related to that area, it's going to be negative connotation or bad or nasty, and so yeah, anything that's urban is good, anything that's city, urban, good, anything rural, bad. Okay, so I have some examples here of some of this. So already before, pagan becomes a sort of slur for backwards, idiot or something, maybe even backwards spiritually idiot person or something like that at some point to some. But it literally just, what did we say the root is from? Literally just countryside person who's just, probably, not as multicultural, hip to it. And, you can have your own take on that of what you feel. But, and yeah, heathen, someone who just lives on the heath, someone who lives, out on the wild lands, essentially. And here I found some other interesting ones that I thought also did a good job of showing this example. So one of these famous word, villain, right? History of the word villain. It actually is related to the word meaning inhabitant of a villa. Okay. I guess I'd never figured that the word villain just meant someone who lived at a villa. Okay. It starts with an actual word. Actually, it's medieval word villainous. It matters because although the word villa in classical Latin referred to a large country dwelling by the time of late Latin, the word could also generally refer to any aggregation of rural dwellings, make it nearly equivalent to meaning a village. Medieval Latin came after late Latin, making villainous with its inhabitants of villa meaning basically a synonym of villager, which doesn't exactly evoke that evilly conniving villa-abiding villain, okay? So yeah, the word village and villager somehow cognates with villain, okay? And so the landed aristocracy, those at home in villas in the classical Latin sense of the word, dominating medieval society and the days of medieval English, had all the power politically and linguistically, linguistically. And under their use of the word, the Middle English descended to villainous, meaning villager, developed that meaning of a person of uncouth mind and manners. So literally a villager, someone who doesn't have manners, who doesn't, keep up to standards, or they're, nasty, poor person. As the common equating of manners with morals gained in strength and currency, the connotations worsened, so that the modern word villain is no unpolished villager, but instead, among other things, a deliberate scoundrel or criminal. So yeah, interesting that once again, a word to describe a villager is someone, a more rustic folk, a more self-independent folk, maybe could be argued, has some words that seem to paint them as bad people, right? Not only at first it was unpolished, unpolished. That's also going to be irrelevant as well. But eventually, being literally a scoundrel and criminal. I'm pretty sure villainous knave or something is a Shakespeare line. Y'all let me know. Another word that I won't pull up here is courteous. This was going to involve the word court, another sort of city center concept, essentially. And going back to the word city, so the Greek word for city is polis, but even the words such as polite are going to derive from things like from the Greek word polis here, okay? Pertaining to public life, and polites, citizen, from polis. So yeah, you're good if you're polite. It's because you're probably from the polis. You're going to be, the literal sense is obsolete in English, the sense of elegant and cultured. But yeah, we go, and polished is that root word for some of this stuff as well. And politus, refined, elegant, from Latin. So yeah, someone from the polis, from city, is also going to be refined and elegant once again. Okay. The word civil, same thing, relating to civil law or life, pertaining to the internal affairs of a state, essentially meaning not barbarous, another word we'll talk about, or civilized, okay? So yeah, the word civil, if you're an upstanding person, if you're got morals or whatever, it has to literally do with being a citizen of a city, essentially. The word astute, keen in discernment, usually crafty and smart, right? Also comes from the Greek word for another word for asti, town, another Greek word borrowed into Latin, meaning the same thing, right? So another word describing something smart and polished and refined and cultured and smart. Also happens to deal with people that are in the urban setting, once again, okay? And going back to the word barbarian, literally was just a word used by the Romans to essentially describe the people that sounded like bar, 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 bar. It's essentially, if it's, calling, essentially people from China the Ching Chongs or something like that, right? That'd be a sort of modern equivalent maybe to what they're doing that. And that would be a highly, probably like racially charged, thing in 2024, I would imagine, to just totally reduce it all down to some, very common sounding phonetics in the language, right? That would be pretty, we'd probably find it insulting maybe at some point. But once again, what are the barbarians referring to? It's referring to the same Germanic peoples, essentially, right? All over again. Same people as what the Heaths is being referred to. And so, yeah, with this idea of, rural people bad, inner city people good, we have words that sort of seem to have a lot of connotation meanings of that. Even in Italian, urbano means urban and polite. Villano means rude. Urbane means refined in manner. And so once again, just trying to paint this picture or paint this sort of connection that I'm starting to see between urban life, urban stuff, good, polite, smart, progressive, stuff like that. Rural, backwards, stupid, behind the times. So, but recently I've almost had this, and coming from modern America sort of point of view here, I've had this observation that Christianity almost sees itself in the pagan shoes today. And how much of the rural populace in America would you guess is Christian in some form today? And I'm not talking about a church you might maybe even find like your local suburb, like a new age Christian church maybe. But I'm talking about, these folks that are out here, between the major city hubs, essentially, in the rural areas are going to be your more rugged individual type, your more farmer, rancher, blue collar, perhaps. Tradition is the way of life out there. They're tied to the land. They're tied to their local customs. And I guess I would say, and the opposing force in modern terms is inside the city philosophy. I guess you could call it, atheism, scientism, the new forward-thinking way as it touts its iPhones and now burgeoning AI to the world as the future and sort of the limitless of what science and technology and the human spirit can do. I was kind of batting around some ideas with Chance for this word. Yeah, I was calling it like mythic materialism, where Chance came up with secular materialism, which I think is that both of them sort of hit that point. But I would say that they definitely, Richard Dawkins types. You got your, I don't know what Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or what those guys kind of think, but maybe what those guys are sort of leaning into. Yeah, but I would say that this, modern sort of technological age, this secular materialism, mythic materialism, scientism would profess itself as the inheritor of this outdated Christian system, right? I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of arguments saying that Christians believe in sort of fanciful, sort of farcical things, things that don't make sense, that are irrational, stuff like that, right? And I'm pretty sure that Christians today would push back against some of that rhetoric coming out of those, soon-to-be 15-minute cities. But I think we can already start to see some of these modern sort of terms kind of come up again, and tell me if maybe pagan and heathen can kind of, if I'm making connection here with some of these words here, okay, with modern ones. But I'll flash them on the screen here real quick. For modern slurs or modern derogatory terms for like country rural folk, okay? Country bumpkin, hillbilly, redneck, white trash. So I think these are some of like the more modern ones, and some of these terms might even be more racially charged actually than carry a religious tone to it. I had sort of asked around, if I called you a redneck, is it insinuated that you're also, that you also believe in Jesus? Is that a fair assumption? Y'all let me know if it does or not. It seems to kind of have I don't know if people in Europe call each other white trash. Y'all need a lot of rednecks, so I don't know if this is specifically in a modern American culture, but I would say for sure that if I was, a city slicker and you called someone, a hillbilly redneck, it's probably safe to, you Bible thumper would probably also be thrown in there maybe for good measure or something like that. Maybe some people wouldn't find that offensive term, but you get my gist maybe. But I thought that, once again, country bumpkin, it's got a locale name to it. Country, rural folk, Paganos, bumpkin, idiot, Paganos, idiot person, country bumpkin who's out there living in the sticks, who doesn't know from their left from right. Hillbilly, once again, hill designates a sort of a landmark, a sort of geography here. Heathen, right? Hillbilly. I didn't even look up the etymology for hillbilly when this first gets used. But yeah, I was thinking of, hillbilly, heath tard. Maybe that's sort of a little too charged there. But, I'm just thinking of equivalents here that would be just as sort of nasty, essentially, right? If I were to use some of these old terms and remix them and to make it, sort of hit home for modern ears. Yeah, so it's just an interesting thing that I'm starting to see, that are Christians sort of finding themselves in the pagan shoes in a sense. Are they the new backwards and attached to the old ways, of our modern day? And in some circles, maybe Christian is enough of a slur. In some circles, enough to be derogatory. But I don't think it's a generally recognized, curse or derogatory term yet. So what else would we maybe use for that? Zealot, maybe. Fundamental, evangelical. I don't know. In my opinion, fundamental and evangelical hinges on being radically religious, overly pushy, or intolerant. And so, yeah, just as once Christians had used terms to designate and distance themselves from other, thinking peoples, and we can, this is not really an episode to get into the hair of, into the weeds of the conversion period or anything like that. But these terms were used in that sense, and so I can just see them now being repurposed against people that are still living in those locales and still mostly taking the brunt of all of the negative connotation between all the words or whatever. For the most part, they don't have a lot of real estate as far as being rural and being cultured and smart, not like the polis or the polites and all those other Greek words that we sort of talked about earlier. So yeah, y'all let me know if you thought the etymological breakdown was interesting, or if you thought my thoughts on the subject are completely way off, or if you thought that they actually resonated or not. Just sort of my own musings, not really taking any too hot takes on it. Just sort of just laying it out there, maybe for posterity's sake, for whatever reason. Just some things I've been noticing, and just wanted to start a discussion on it and see. And once again, with the Shakespeare question, I think the words themselves are highly charged, and maybe if we kind of get into that magic sense, and magic is nothing but words in my mind, and a lot of that in this sense, are heavily tied up with it anyway, and so. Yeah, if you want to spell, you're going to need to spell out the words, essentially, that you're going to be casting. And so I think that, if you're into that sort of line about what metaphysics are tied up with language, then I think this subject is actually very, very important for it. Once again, if there is inherent, mind mechanism ties going on here as describing people that live in the rural areas as the more, locally tied people, and yeah, how does that make people feel these days? I know some people will just go, "Oh, that's how it was, and that's how war goes, and that's blah 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 blah." But now I can kind of see them on the end the end of that sort of manifest destiny from these like city centers, where this new sort of atheistic materialism whatever is sort of like spreading outwards. And if you believe in that, that's totally fine. That's up to you. Y'all let me know if it does feel like those people in the rural areas are holding it back, or if the people in the rural areas think that the other people are just reaching for a progress that is never going to actually fully be achieved, and that they're distancing themselves too far from the ways that people live for long successful amounts of time, and that have kept the culture running and things still going on and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's an interesting sort of conflict sort of coming out here. Is scientism perverted progress, reaching folly, or is it reaching utopia? And is Christianity on its last dying leg, or is it still bringing people into heaven? I'd like to know your thoughts, and y'all let me know if you like this episode or not. And I'll probably have some more of these other weird little solo episodes here and there as I sort of think of them or whatnot. But thank you so much for sticking around to the end, and I hope to see you all on the next video. Nullius in Verba.